Hello, and welcome to today's fourth webinar in the UK Market Access series. This is a series that TIQ have put together to try and explain and explore how Queensland exporters can continue to access the UK market, even in these unusual times where we're all very much constrained by COVID in terms of travel and pretty much every aspect of business. My name is Warren Bartlett. I'm the Deputy Trade and Investment Commissioner for Trade and Investment Queensland. I'm based here in Europe, part of a small team, usually located in London. We cover the whole of Europe, and our purpose really is to try and support Queensland exporters to get traction in European markets. I'm joined today by two excellent speakers with a wealth of experience in both global trade and international marketing. Andy Davidson, who is with the Brisbane Economic Development Agency, and Joanna Dodd, who's with the Rochester PR Specialist Consultancy. So today's focus is on, sorry, I've got a dog barking in the background, excuse me. Okay, start again. Today's focus is very much on how to get your marketing and PR strategy right for the UK market. It's a very important issue and one that most Queenslanders and general exporters really need to focus down on. So before I kick off in terms of the moving over to the speakers, I'd like to just run through some very brief housekeeping. The session today in terms of speakers will run for approximately 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes. It will be recorded, so we are recording today's session, and recordings are made available to everyone. So there will be a link sent to you via email as a follow-up, which will direct you to the recording for this session, but also previous sessions that we've run. As I say, this is the fourth in the series, so there's some great content available for you to review at your own leisure. Please do ask questions. There is a Q&A function in Zoom, so please post any questions that you might have throughout the session into that Q&A box. I will be picking that up and certainly be able to put that to the speakers towards the end of the session. Very quickly, just a bit of an update on the UK economy. You're probably aware that the UK has been hit very hard by the global pandemic. I mean, both socially and economically. I guess a lot of countries have. But I think there's been some very encouraging news actually very recently. So EY actually put out a forecast. They're expecting the UK economy to recover at a growth rate of 6.8%, which is actually an upgrade on previous expectations. In fact, that would be the highest rate of growth in the UK economy since the end of the Second World War. So it's quite significant in that context. Fueled actually by a number of things, businesses, particularly SMEs, performing better than I think the government and obviously economists had perhaps expected. So that's kind of leading to a bit of a more optimistic viewpoint, but also of particular interest today for those of you that are in the consumer goods space. There's an expectation around a bit of a consumer boom based on more wealthy households in the UK having increased their savings during the pandemic, I guess because limitations on what you can actually spend on. And then coupled with a fairly, I guess, significant pent-up demand for consumer goods. So as restrictions start to lift in the UK, the expectation is that the consumer spending will increase significantly. So that's something to be aware of, particularly if you're in that space. And I think it goes down to the point about when's the right time to come into the UK market? Well, always, I guess, but at the moment, I think it probably is a good time compared to maybe 6 months ago, just before Christmas, where things were, actually looking quite tough. So that's a bit of context. The other piece of encouraging news that's come through very recently was in relation to the UK-Australia free trade agreements. So Dan Tehan, the Australian Trade Minister, has publicly announced that he expects an in-principle deal to be done by June. So I think the headline was breakthrough in NFTA trade negotiations. So that's encouraging. I think we probably always knew that there was an appetite to get through this deal in the right way, but in a fairly expedient way. But just hearing that announcement, that's I think another area of encouragement, and also it's very important for the UK and Australia links. So I think it's now time to introduce Andy Davidson before my dog starts barking again. Um, Andy, as I said, has a wealth of experience in international trade. He spent some time with the UK government as a foreign diplomat. He's also performed an advisory role with the Mayor of London, and he's now the general manager or acting general manager, industry growth and trade with the Brisbane Economic Development Agency. So Andy, over to you.
Thanks, mate. And I hope my dog behaves better this evening here in Brisbane than your dog is behaving in central London. But thanks to Teams Queensland in London for organising this event, as Warren said. My name is Andy Davidson. I'm the acting GM at Brisbane Economic Development Agency. For those that don't know, Brisbane Economic Development Agency is the official economic and promotional agency for Brisbane. My role is to help local businesses grow and expand, attract new business to make our city their home, creating new jobs and growth. We work with small local businesses at the Brisbane Business Hub, which focuses on our small business support services. We also operate scaling sector programs, food and beverage, prop tech, health, along with reshoring and advanced manufacturing content. But my objective today is not to talk about Brisbane, but to give you some quick insights on why the UK does have that propelling proposition for business or investment plans. And I hope that you leave today's session on with more reality than maybe perception in terms of why the UK can feature in your future growth plans. As Warren said, I've been a diplomat for 25 years. I joined from high school. I trained in London for 5 years, was armed with rudimentary Russian and sent to Kiev in '96. And from there until 2012, I covered trade and investment portfolios across Europe, Africa and Asia. In 2012, I was then loaned, as Warren said, to the Mayor of London to work on the London Olympics, London's partnerships and London's international relations effort. And during my time, I worked on our scale up and investment programs to grow London's ecosystem along with our global business engagement. So I'll just give you a few quick insights, things that might stick or resonate with you. Firstly, in all my time, most successes I've seen are often down to luck, right place, right time. That said, I do believe with effort you can engineer that luck. Your beliefs, your brand, your opinion and your position on topics and issues matter as a business leader. Simply applying a product or service is no longer enough. Don't overthink things. By the time you have, someone else has already got to where you wanted to be. And finally, everywhere is different, not better or worse, just different. It's working out which pluses matter the most to you and your business and which minuses matter the least. We did an exercise in London and we found that businesses deciding on expansion into new markets or cities are rarely driven by business-based decisions. It's dinner table driven. It's about schools, family, safety, entertainment, connectivity and lifestyles. Perception is the UK is challenging, and the reality is, honestly, it can be. The perception is the UK is expensive. I can only talk from being from London, but I'd say Brisbane is probably on par. My Australian wife tells me Brisbane is more expensive overall to live than in central London. Plug into the support network. There is an extensive ecosystem to help you, such as the Australian and state assets based in the UK covering Europe, along with UK city and federal based support with offices in Brisbane. They all want you to grow your business. Their metrics are for business to create new jobs, which aligns to your ambition. I'm going to say this, but London is always particularly interesting. Not only does it connect you with the UK, but it connects you with Europe and the rest of the world. Every major global corporation, give or take a few, has representation there. The ecosystem is majorly collaborative, connected and talented. You will find this with competitors too. Scale and growth will outstrip a partisan approach. The UK is also familiar. Language, law, finance, regulatory skills are all there, which helps you and your business land quicker to focus on customers and clients. I think one of the things I do see is to grow outside Australia, you need to find ways of collaboration over competition. Your market size in Australia will potentially be realised in the southeast of England alone. I saw a lot of Australian businesses not attain their potential because their strategy mirrored their domestic growth. Don't kid yourself, it is not the same. Adapt it and use the local knowledge and market. There's plenty available. I genuinely believe there are opportunities, but you must be realistic and do your homework. Build your strategy and invest in your business to succeed. Be honest with yourself, resource appropriately, or simply don't bother, but not half measures. My experience, that never works. Finally, invest in your digital offer. PR and marketing are critical. Cut through and traction are challenging without an evolving strategy for you, your products and your services, which Joanna from Rochester will talk to next. On that, Warren, I'll wrap up just to say I'm happy to stay on and take some calls. Back to you, mate.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, really good insight. And I know you have a lot of experience in the UK market. One of the things I know you often speak about is London's sort of global position, if you like, as almost like a global capital. And we've seen a number of Queensland companies that have actually landed here and are now successfully operating a global business from the UK. So they almost have, they're focusing their domestic footprint on Australia and managing that market, and then separating the global business from a London headquarter, which kind of does work. So that's something to think about as well, and I think it illustrates the points you've been making. So Joanna Dodd will be next up. Just before I pass on to Joanna, or pass over to Joanna, I'd just like to reference a report that was recently put out by our friends over in New Zealand at New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, so effectively an equivalent organisation to Trade and Investment Queensland, but obviously focused on New Zealand exports. They've just recently put out some insights based on analysis of, I think, 700 of their export clients. And they were looking at, what are the major challenges that those exporters face globally when exporting. So it was truly global across all markets, across the SMEs were operating across most sectors, but particularly food and beverage and consumer goods. And interestingly, there was a top 5 that came out as consistently the biggest priorities across all geographic markets. And at the top of those top 5 was brand awareness. So exactly what we're talking about today. And it was really interesting. I mean, it was even higher. It was ranked higher than, pricing strategies, finding the right channel to market. And I think it became, as I read the report, it became apparent that actually they're all obviously very much linked. But I think it's about, getting your brand, your business out there in a market first, because essentially you're a startup when you come into a new market, regardless of your success domestically. Obviously, if you have success, that's great, and you would be looking to build on that. But, you're still starting from an awareness level that's pretty low, particularly in a really crowded and noisy environment like the UK. But this is where Joanna comes in. This is her expertise and her bread and butter. So I'll pass over to Joanna Dodd, who's Managing Director at Rochester PR. They do a fantastic job. They've worked with many international businesses coming into the UK, and I'm sure Joanna has some really interesting insights to share. So over to you, Joanna.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks for that introduction. I'm just going to share my presentation. So hopefully you can all see that now. So yes, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm Joanna Dodd from Rochester PR, and I did a session September last year, actually, with Trade and Investment Queensland alongside a few other companies, sort of giving a whistle-stop tour of the UK market. So delighted to be back to talk a bit more detail about PR and marketing and to expand on some of those points. Just a brief introduction to us and why we're able to talk to you, I guess, is we are specialists in market entry, as Warren said, and we help international and homegrown brands successfully launch and enter the UK market. So we've got a very broad spread of client sectors, and the type of PR we do, we work across B2B and consumer brands, So I will be sort of talking a bit about those, but hopefully you'll be able to extrapolate and think, okay, she's talking about a business brand, but the same applies for consumer and vice versa. And we have an extremely broad view of the type of work we do. So, you know, a couple of examples, we've been building a network for a tech company from Canada recently. We've been working with them for 2 years now, just testing out their sort of product before they bring it to market, and they're just about to launch. And then another example recently, helping a company launch into the UK to a very specific target audience, in this case, executive assistants and PAs. And we did that through a series of virtual events and getting them PR for their app and reviews. So we're tactic agnostic. We look at what a client needs most to stand out and what will offer them the best value. But it's all about giving sort of our clients the best opportunity to, whether that's a consumer, corporate, or trade business brand, to be the most successful they can as quickly as possible. And that's really because, as Warren was just saying, we sort of take the view that when you come into the UK, you're pretty much an SME again, or not known in this country. And this is adapted from Adam Morgan about challenger brands. And we see everybody, you know, down the bottom left. You might be known actually a bit, but, you know, generally around there. And we're trying to build you up to become a trusted brand. And typically that involves what we would say a bit of a head and heart strategy. So the heart is more the emotional stuff. So very much consumer brands, but also works for business brands too. We all do business with people that we trust. And then on the head side, that's more the facts or the figures or the data or all the things that relate to your brand. So that's how we think, and that's what we start in terms of helping our clients. So what I'm covering today, I'm going to try and give you some ideas about how you could gather the right data for the UK market, look a bit at trends and consumer behaviour at the moment, which obviously has shifted for all of us in various different ways. And out of that, hopefully there'll be some ideas already, but also talk then about content-led strategies. And all of that's about sort of avoiding assumptions about the UK market, which is easy to do. So I like this, The Truth About Global Brands. It's produced by agency McCann, and it's basically saying that the basics of steering your brand are the same whether you're global or local. It's about making sure that you're relevant, making sure you're understood, and making sure you're consistent. And these quotes come from Microsoft in the report. You know, the basics are pretty much the same, but that doesn't mean it's easy, which is extremely true. And I think one trend that's been quite interesting, that's been growing in the last few years, is that consumers are beginning to trust local brands more over global brands. That's sort of been shifting up. And I think that what that should say to you is to think about, you know, in terms of the UK market, what you can do to appear local here in the UK. Often there's no doubt a country, you know, an Australian brand, your provenance is going to be hugely, hugely important. But then you've got to adapt it and make sure it's really relevant for the UK market. And the other quote that I really like is, you know, don't confuse the internet or social media with going global. Just because you think you're out there and, you know, on social doesn't mean that actually anything that you've said so far has really resonated in the UK market. So in terms of the data to help inform your strategy, I'd always say talk to the been there, done that brigade, which will be, in your case, other companies that you know that have made the leap into the UK. Always worth talking to them, finding out what they've done. But I would also say sort of read between the lines a bit. Don't take everything they say as gospel. What worked for them then might not work now. Or it might work even better for you. So, you know, take a little bit of time to interrogate that. Obviously, you've got great access to Trade and Investment Queensland, who've got enormous amount of information and knowledge. And it just makes such sense to start with that as your starting point. And then you can obviously do the sort of the SWOTs and the pests, but looking at it as much as possible as you can from the UK market. So, you know, thinking about, you know, why is the UK going to want to hear about you? Who's going to be most interested in it? Why should they be interested in your brand? You know, what problems you solve here in the UK, not back at home. And remembering also that brand purpose is hugely important. So it's something I'll talk about in a few minutes, but it's often as important as the brand itself nowadays. So really have a think about your brand purpose and how it will resonate for the UK market. And then sort of look at your market, not so much just in the stats and the data that tells you it's a good market to enter, but look at your market sector and really try and get to know it. And ideally do this before you come, but you know, is it really noisy? Is it busy? What time of year is it busy? You know, who's the key trade association that you might think about following or noticing what they're up to? You know, really, what are the key times of year? Who are the key opinion formers? Is there good media, you know, trade media for that sector that you could start reading and finding out more about? Really sort of dig deep. You know, we've had one client who was hugely successful by joining his trade body, you know, a year before he landed, and that just started to build up his knowledge and awareness and worked incredibly well for him. And then you also sort of want to think about, I mean, we did some research amongst Australian companies. I have to say this is pre-COVID, so things may have changed, but the biggest challenges they were talking about were time taken to win customers, lack of contacts, and then competing with local brands. And that's very true. I think it's probably time taken to win customers is one of the biggest queries that we often get, whether that's a consumer brand and you're trying to sell into retail and you find that they only review their ranges once a year, or if you're a business brand and you're trying to sell to businesses and it's just taking you that time to get through. And then we also asked what Australian companies were doing to prepare for the UK, again, pre-COVID. So some of this will have changed, but so it's 43% were talking about adapting their messaging for the UK market, which is great. And then quite high up was going to local trade shows, which is obviously difficult at the moment, but still quite important to get as much information as you can. And then similar to sort of really digging deep into your market, have a look at your competitors and really try and find out who they are. I mean, different sectors are very different. So beauty brands are launching, you know, often sort of a new variant every 6 weeks. You know, how busy are your competitors being? You can get a good sense of what they are doing in terms of their marketing, and sometimes even a good sense of what they're spending on their marketing. And that's really quite useful to you. You can see how they're positioning themselves, what they're talking about. And all of that helps you start to think, well, you know, how can I stand out? We always say, you know, the UK is a great market, but one of the things that makes it great is there's a lot of people in it. So it's going to be competitive to you. And sometimes people look at, well, I haven't got any direct competition. And that may be true, but if you're in a sector that sells into the same retail space, for example, you're going to be competing with lots of other brands around you. So it's really important to get to know them as well as you can. And one key sort of market entry strategy we see a lot is that, you know, follow your first customer, which works really, really well. But again, I would say that those customers are also going to be bombarded by local competition. So it's equally as well to be informed about what they're doing. Next, I just want to sort of give you some idea. Okay, well, that was a preview. I hope you enjoyed that one. Sort of looking at current trends and consumer behaviours, which obviously have changed quite considerably recently. So I think probably one of the big ones is that, you know, COVID, and perhaps very similar to what you're experiencing, there's been a sort of shift into a desire for a simpler lifestyle, recognizing what's important in life, and, you know, sort of going almost back to basics. So just picking out a few of those sort of COVID related elements. For example, a 400% increase in online searches for nostalgic toys, you know, sort of ditch the plastic, let's all go back to what really counts. On the top right, you know, obviously if you're targeting businesses and offices, that's challenging at the moment. We're not all back. But even if you're targeting, consumers or commuters for lunchtime spend, that also isn't there at the moment. We're going to probably be having much more of a hybrid working model. So you'd have to think, how you adapt to that in the UK. Towards the bottom, we've had a huge increase, obviously, in online shopping, as have most people. And for the first time, really, the older age group were shopping online much, much more than before. So we suddenly had an audience that we could reach that is often quite difficult to reach. And that's been really interesting. And McKinsey's done some research recently sort of saying that 92% of UK consumers, of those that currently spend online, are intending to continue purchasing online post-COVID. So there's this challenge now for retailers, how do you meet expectations for consumers when they visit your store, and also the ones that are going to stay online. But generally speaking, on the retail side, huge increases in terms of online sales. Obviously, fashion's boomed, lifestyles boomed as well, homeware also, and a lot of those people that I was saying earlier that maybe were going into the office working from home are spending a lot of their money on home improvements. But there's also from McKinsey, and Warren was talking about the sort of spending, there's huge optimism that's going to be leading to an increase in spending. So I think it's just under 50% say that they're intending to spend a lot more on non-essential items in the next few months. So they've got this pent up money waiting at home. Also Kantar published research recently about people adopting more environmentally friendly habits and how they're taking that all more seriously. And also that's coming through from the younger age group, particularly 20% of people aged 18 to 34 feel that brands should guide the change and play an active role in making the world a better place. So you've got a lot of different trends and consumer behaviours going on. And I suppose one of the challenges for all of us is to try and work out whether these changes will be permanent. But, when I was saying earlier about gathering data, it's really important, if you're looking at the UK, to try and work out what you think might have changed in the last few months. Brand purpose. We're seeing more clients investing time and energy in considering their brand purpose. I mentioned it earlier. So, your reason for being other than to make money. And there've been a lot of studies around that explain that, people are more likely to purchase and recommend if they believe in your brand, 4 times more likely, and 6 times more likely to protect, your brand, your company if there was something bad being said about it. So I think a lot of companies are thinking about this and thinking, how can I bring that maybe further to the fore, maybe dial it up a bit, but particularly look at it in terms of the UK and how it could work. So check in on your brand purpose, I think, is time really well spent. It obviously likes that third slide. I'm really not sure why, but anyway, another trend we want to talk about is sort of sustainability. Green is the new black. Sustainability is very cool now, obviously, but UK consumers, and I'm sure this is not just UK consumers, but UK consumers are really savvy about it. They like the eco credentials. They can give you an edge, but just be careful that you don't fall into the trap of greenwashing, and shoppers are able to see through these sort of marketing tactics, and it can be even worse, if they're seen to be dodgy in any shape or form. So, from consumers, it's much more about, a little less conversation, a little more action, please. And we had a journalist write some information for us on our blog, on our website. And she was just saying, make it easy for me as a journalist to find all of your claims, so, pop your sustainability page up on your website, make it really obvious, don't hide it somewhere. If you're recycling plastic bottles to make your clothes, show me a visual of the Olympic-sized swimming pool that all those plastic bottles, would fill, or show me your team collecting those plastic bottles. Make it really obvious. And it's something that we say a lot about when we're working with journalists. What do journalists want? The truth. But actually, when that stands for something that's topical, relevant, unusual trouble, which is usually the one you don't want to go after, and that's when they find you, and human interest. And human interest is really important, both for consumer and business brands. So always thinking of what problem you're solving and how this is going to help and bring humans through to the fore, whether that's you as a founder, your story, or the people working for you. Also, though, just on the green is the new black, a lot of people, obviously, really high percentage. This is research done recently. 92% think that it's really important that to future generations, we've got to think about the planet, but then 48% say convenience still takes priority. So if you've got fair trade, if you've got other sustainable credentials, make sure that it's worth probably part of your marketing budget, making sure those are really visible, and making sure that they can be seen. But then remembering also what consumers also want underneath all of this has got to be the right style, quality, convenience, and value for money. So don't just try the greenwashing. Make sustainability a focus, not an afterthought, to help keep your loyal customers engaged. This is the slide it wanted to get to. I think having said all of that, there's some consumer behaviors, there's some trends, but trends, as we know, change really, really fast. This is why your sort of ongoing job is to keep watching this market and keep finding out what you think the next trends are going to be. This is more on the B2B side. We, talked to Startups magazine. Again, you can find this on our website, about the sort of key areas that the editor felt were going to be big booms particularly in tech companies coming up in 2021 post-COVID, and possibly, sort of no surprise, but health tech has been booming in the UK for some time, so still really, really important. And then education, ed tech, again, we've seen a lot of that because obviously because of us all going online for kids' education. That's been seeing quite an upsurge, and she's expecting that to continue. And then lastly, she's talking about, travel will bounce back, obviously been hit really hard, but not just sort of travel for holidays and stuff, but actually also travel in terms of scooters and bikes and different ways of traveling around. And within that, actually, I'd also say sports as well. So, cycling, e-bikes, all those sort of things will be coming back and becoming more important. So how do you go about responding to these current changes? Well, you have to make sure that you've got your messaging right. Everything I've been saying up to now is check out what you think is right for you and your brand in the UK, and then make sure, that you can adapt your messaging to make that really fit the UK market, the UK consumers, the UK businesses, and what they're really looking for. So, rather than, saying, we're the biggest in Australia or the most successful in Australia, you want to think about why that's going to be relevant to the UK audience. What message and what problem are you solving for us? Think about your target audiences. So not just your direct audience, whether that's a business or a consumer, but all those target audiences around it that will influence those buying decisions. So, like I was saying earlier, that could be trade associations, stakeholder groups, consumer groups. Try and find all those people that you need to interact with. And then obviously, lastly, you've got to try and use the right tactics to reach people. So this next slide here is really about looking at those potential tactics. And I don't know how many of you know these ones, but it's called PASO. And then we always say paid, owned, earned, shared. So we don't even spell it out right, but that's what it stands for. And we use this slide sometimes just as a sort of a prompt for clients that we start working with to sort of get them to think about what they've already got, what collateral they already have. So, you start to think about what the trends and consumer behavior are over here. And now you're trying to think about what content, therefore, what, will deliver those messages. So you've got lots of options here, and we haven't got time to go through them all, but it gives you an idea about what you can look at that you may already have from, you know, from home that could work. And sometimes it's actually digging out something that you may not be using anymore, but is still really relevant. It could be something that was written for you, you know, it could be a white paper, it could be a podcast you've got that you haven't really thought might be relevant for the UK market. So worth having a look around all of this. And at the same time as you're doing this, you know, just again, going back to what I was saying earlier about your competitors, you know, think what you think they are doing. You don't want to necessarily, you know, do exactly the same. You don't want to copy them, but have a look, because it will give you some ideas about the sort of the market that you're entering and what sort of content is going to work really, really well for them. For you and for them, I mean the audiences that you're trying to target. And I'm going to pick up on one element of that, which is really the one up the top, which is the PR side, which is obviously what we spend a lot of our time doing, which is, you know, pitching to the media. And I think it's really challenging for you, or for anybody looking at the UK market, to work out what the stories are going to be, what's going to resonate, and what's interesting. But we really like this piece. I'm going to go back to EdTech now, that we talked to a journalist about, who sort of works on in the UK market. And I would say it must be very similar, but it's different. You know, for brands that are used to being big news or generating publicity relatively easily in a home territory, it can come as a bit of a shock. Working into the UK market. So this is a journalist who works across a lot of the national papers here in the UK. And she's saying, you know, if you're trying to pitch to me for an EdTech, you've got an EdTech business you're bringing over to the UK. And I just like the way she's written it, actually, because I think it's done in a very wry British style. But what doesn't work would be things like, a new app helps teachers teach, or tech firm wins contract to supply schools, or well-paid woman in EdTech encourages other women. Tech helps girls learn STEM skills. So, you know, what she's sort of saying is that's often, to be honest, what we get approached by a client saying, oh, look, I've won this contract. So this is going to be big news. And I think everything that I've been trying to say beforehand about knowing your market, seeing what's happening, seeing what your competitors have been doing, is really about trying to finesse that story and make it more interesting. So what she goes on to say is, these are the things that at the moment would be really intriguing to her. So if you could talk about digital divide and social mobility, or mental health, or online vulnerability of children, or AI within education, if you could talk about any of those other topics that are thinking about what she wants to write about, what she thinks her readers want to read, then you're much more likely to cut through. So, you know, when you start thinking about your brand and what you've got to offer the UK, and particularly what you've got to offer in terms of PR, you know, think again and think around it about what's going to be really relevant. The main thing that I always say to clients is that it's about being adaptable in the UK. I mean, particularly maybe in these weird times we find ourselves in, you know, things are changing. As I said, trends are changing fast. You know, since I wrote this document, there's probably been another 3, 4, 5 things over the weekend that we've all picked out as teams that are interesting about trends, or supposed trends. They're not always trends, but people are PRing them as trends. But it is about being adaptable to the market and, you know, making those changes as you go along. But I think to be adaptable, you have to have done something. You have to have started in the first place. You can't adapt by, you know, having done nothing. So the main message I would always say about entering the UK market in terms of PR and marketing is do something, have a plan, you know, and start engaging, because you will find, a bit like I was saying earlier, it takes some time to build up, you know, those contacts to build up your business. It takes time to get a PR and marketing campaign to be a success. So, you know, don't leave it too late, and, you know, think about your resources and how much you've got, both in terms of your time and budget, obviously, but really important to do something. Don't wait until you're nearly ready to go and then hope that everybody's going to be waiting to hear from you, because it's definitely going to be more competitive than that. And so finally, if you ever do want to get in touch, then obviously you can find us through Warren and his team, but we'd be delighted to hear from you.
Thanks, Joanna. That was brilliant. Really appreciate that. I certainly learned a lot through that. One thing I was just going to comment on it. I mean, it's quite interesting about, I guess the thing that stood out for me was the know your market versus become known in the market. I mean, they're sort of two sides of the same coin, aren't they? It's really interesting. I mean, the purpose of raising awareness is to get your brand known, but you need to understand the market before you can achieve that, it seems. So that was really insightful. Okay, so fantastic. I think we've got a bit of time for some questions now, so I'll kick off. I've got some questions based on my experience actually in dealing with export clients, and one of those is that we often get asked, is more of a general question, and hopefully it can go to both Andy and Joanna, is around I guess I can wrap two questions into one. So the timing of, so when do I need to, if I'm an exporter and I'm considering the UK market, at what point do I need to start implementing my PR strategy in order to, assist the end goal, which is to do business and win orders? And this one might be more for you, Andy, do I need a presence in that market before, later, at the same time? So it's hard to answer, but if you've got some sort of, you can draw on some experience and maybe just give some insight there. I don't think there is a particular right answer, but, it very much depends on the sector that companies operate in. But I don't know, maybe Andy, if you've got a comment on, the timing and does my business need to be present versus can it be remotely? It's obviously particularly pertinent at the moment, given we can't travel.
Personally, I think if you'd have asked me 5 years ago, I would have always said you do need, ideally need a body in market. I think what COVID's taught us is, certain things we thought wouldn't be sticky have become sticky, and other things that we thought would be dismissed. And I'm seeing a lot of business being done virtually at the moment. So, and I think we'll see a lot more due dil done remotely with businesses, and it's a great way to learn. I don't think you'll ever get around, as you scale, that you will need a body in that market. I think your business has an ethos. It has a style that I don't think, unless you have someone to push that through a new and growing business in a foreign land, I don't think you get that business that you want as those business leaders. But I do think at the moment, now more than ever, business is being done remotely. So 5 years ago, definitely not. Now, I think you can have a hybrid, but ultimately, I think you still would, in an ideal world, to have the business that you want, you need that business person in market.
Yeah, but perhaps not as an immediate pressure as it might have been in the past. Yeah, okay, thanks, Andy. So Joanna, I suppose more from maybe the PR side, in terms of where that should fit in, implementation of strategy versus actually being in the market, and what are your thoughts there?
Well, I think it's a bit like, as Andy was saying, I mean, I think, we've got several examples, of clients that have started off, and then as their business has grown and they can see it's definitely going to be scalable, they bring somebody in, and that can be, any time frame. I think, but so yes, ultimately somebody on the ground, but I think the great thing that you can do now remotely is to do all of that, data gathering, watching the market, setting up the Google alerts for what's happening, watching trends. And that's, I think, should help a lot of people when they arrive here. They will feel a lot more, and I don't mean literally arrive, but arrive with their goods or whatever, feel a lot more confident. And that's working. We've seen, certainly actually just in the last year, more tech companies launching because they've suddenly realized that they can't be here to shake hands, but so that's great, but they can still, start introducing themselves to people through different ways. So yeah, market entry for us is a really weird sort of long time frame. It can start from when they're researching the market, And then it can also start when they've been here for a bit and maybe things aren't going so well, and they suddenly realize, you know, actually maybe I need to step up my marketing. So market entry, instead of being a really short time frame, is actually quite a long one for us. But yeah, I think it's helping. I mean, it's making people, you know, look at the market and research it more than ever before. So that's good news. That means they're well prepared when they arrive.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Joanna. And just while with you, Joanna, I mean, there's another question around regional differences. So yeah, I guess probably more around consumer behaviour, perhaps for you know, for you. So it always amazes me. UK is obviously relative comparison to Australia, it's a very small country geographically, but there are you know, there are differences in the way people behave regionally. And I just wonder, you know, where would you advise, or how would you advise that might fit into a PR strategy? Or do you think it's not significant? It's not, you know, it doesn't justify it to have a regional focus?
No, I mean, it's really important. So for business brands, often, you know, so a client will always say, "Oh, I want to be in the national, you know, I want to be in the Times or whatever." But actually, there's a lot of research that shows that local business owners actually value their local business paper more than they do a national paper, or, you know, their local broadcast. So having a regional focus is really good. It works equally well for consumer brands as well. And, you know, there are, as you two know, there's sort of pockets around the country where there are, certainly from a business point of view, real sector focus, which is really important if you're trying to raise your profile. Say, to find your first employee in that, you know, that region can be really important for you. But yeah, no, it does work. We do a lot of work into regional sort of media, because they're really valuable. I suppose the other big one that's obviously grown hugely recently, that I haven't really talked about much, but is bloggers and you know, and the influencers and social media, which is huge too. But region, it is important. It depends very much, as always, on the company and the brand and what you're trying to do. But there are differences, and it's again the same for us. We have to make sure that we are appealing locally to the business, and if we're doing something in Yorkshire, as we do to somebody in Essex. So the same job that I was telling you have to do looking at the UK market, we have to do as well, to make sure that we can position our clients to be relevant to all those different areas.
Yeah. So it's like that, know your market, isn't it? I mean, the market is segmented geographically, even though it's so small. Yeah, it's quite amazing. I remember attending back in the days when we had actual events, an event about Brexit actually, and there was a panel of journalists, and there was a representative from one of the, let's just say, one of the major UK tabloids, and his comments were really quite a bit of an eye-opener, in as much as, but he was talking more about London and the rest of the UK, and the actual context was in the sensitivity towards price hikes in petrol, in fuel. And so, you know, obviously the majority of London workers don't drive to London, but as soon as you go out of London, the majority of people get to work in their car. And so that, you know, the difference in reaction to a small increase in fuel is quite significant inside London versus out. That was really kind of it's pretty obvious, but you don't necessarily think about it when you're in the London bubble. You know, you get in your train and that's it, really. So Andy, I know you've got some good experience in London. So maybe from a business perspective, do you think there's any kind of major differences in, you know, perhaps that is the question, sort of London versus the rest of the UK? Is there anything you'd want to sort of add there in terms of maybe doing business, probably more broadly?
Well, I mean, just I'll link it actually to the previous question in terms of that regionalisation, and just I obviously talk to colleagues in other cities, and cities are great at collaborating and talking, because we all have very similar problems. One of the patterns we are seeing though is that those businesses that were traditionally singular in their entry into your city and had a larger footprint are now the two biggest projects that we're working on here. They want multiple nodes across the city into the communities, which 5 years ago wouldn't have been a pattern we would have expected. And they're in quite different sectors, but so that regionalisation is from the PR, absolutely, but it's a pattern we're seeing in market entry into cities, and it's not dissimilar in London as well. The idea that you have one office, the strategy on arrival, and say I've got two businesses that they're looking at 10 facilities across the city, and that would never have happened 5 years ago. So those patterns in being within their communities and closer to the consumer is very strong indeed. In terms of major differences from, hey, look, I mean, London's a beast. It's got a concentration of business. It can be probably really daunting, just because there is so much going on, and it's such a huge piece of real estate. I think, but saying that, there's the beauty about London is there's sectoral clusters that you can plug into and lever that probably aren't throughout the rest of the UK to the same extent. I think you've also got bags of talent, access to capital. You can scale and grow, I think, quicker than probably anywhere else in the UK, and that will be reflected in the stats, I'm sure. But as we, I remember an exercise we polled. You might have still been there, Warren. We tried to reach out to pretty much every investment client we had, and we all expected access to law, access to money, governance, regulatory to be the top 5, and none of them made the top 5. It literally was shopping, green space, schools, education, safety, transport. And so I do think that's what London has to offer, but ignore the rest of the UK at your peril, because it is catching up, and there is a big push to lift the rest of the UK post Brexit, and to try and catch up on London.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Andy. That's really helpful. Okay. There's a question here. It's directed towards you, Joanna. So I'm just going to read it straight out. It's from Jeff Bailey. So could Joanna comment on the new plant-based food ranges coming into Waitrose, Sainsbury's, Tesco, etc., given the recognised need to cut meat consumption all over the world? So that's an interesting and a topical one.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, I think what you mentioned, Tesco, Sainsbury's, I mean, it's even wider than that already. It's in loads of the others as well. M&S has got its own plant-based. It's big. It's one of those sectors that has gone from, no shelf space to having a really well-defined area, both in sort of in the fresh aisles and then also in frozen. Definitely here to stay, that's for sure. I think it's one that sort of fits within what I was saying earlier about sort of trends and what everyone's thinking. There was quite a lot of, well, I just was talking about things I read over the weekend. There was something over the weekend that's saying Kantar, and Nielsen, who do the sort of the sales data, saying that apparently corned beef is having a huge resurgence amongst 18 to 24-year-olds. I mean, figures have just shot up. So which goes against, some of the things we're seeing. And that's from data showing sales and everything. So we'd have to dig deeper to work out why that is. But for sure, the whole plant-based thing has generated a lot of interest from the retailers. And once it's in the retailers, then your challenge then is to make sure your rate of sale stays there to prove that it's interesting. But it is something that's definitely of interest to journalists. I think the challenge is going to be how does one keep that sector evolving and changing, and making sure that all those other things I was saying a bit earlier about sustainability, but in terms of food, it's got to still taste really good. Otherwise, people will start saying it doesn't taste so good, and it will, rate of sale slows and things. So, but that is definitely a trend, and it's in there already, and it's quite widespread into a lot of the supermarkets, smaller and bigger ones as well. So, yeah, I expect that will continue, and will be even more competitive. Because it's not a huge space at the moment, so it's more a case of you're going to have to bump somebody off if you want to get on that shelf, and that's the challenge when you're coming in from overseas. You're really trying to kick somebody out in order to get your space. But yeah, it's certainly a trend that's already here and growing.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. Andy, have you got any comments on that? I mean, maybe from what you're seeing coming out of Brisbane in terms of export capabilities, or?
I mean, from my side, obviously we've got the Future Food Programme in SEQ, and protein plant alternate is very much creeping up our plans for next year. And we've spoken before, but we would like to do particularly, I mean, COVID's had that knock on in terms of underbelly and getting product to market quickly, you know, so there are some challenges, but I do think protein's one that we could lever, and we'll be looking at, I think, doing a virtual trade mission to the UK on it might just be as narrow as food, but with the right traction, we would probably go down the protein route.
Okay, that sounds good. Look, so there aren't any other questions. I don't have any other questions necessarily that need to be raised that we haven't covered already, because I think we've had a very thorough session. I'm also conscious that we're on the hour. I just before I wrap up, Joanna or Andy, if you've got anything you'd like to add, please feel free. Just jump in now. Otherwise,
just from me, it's sort of a request to those businesses that have joined today is, please do reach out and tell us your challenges. You know, I can't provide products and services that help you guys do what you need to do, unless you tell me. So please do contact Warren. He's got my details, and I am absolutely happy to listen and work out whether we can adapt what we do to help you better deliver and create new jobs. Yeah, good point, Andy. Yeah. Okay. Joanna, anything from you?
I think from our side, it's just, you know, you do have this amazing opportunity now to research the market and to take a look and find out what's going on. And maybe just going back to the plant-based protein thing. I mean, I think that the challenge now with that market is already getting some traction is, you know, is watching it and seeing it develop and seeing what people are now starting to say about it. So, you know, things always move quite quickly in terms of, you know, what people are talking about. And it's just trying to keep your finger on the pulse and then have a plan that you can, you know, make yourself stand out amongst the crowd and the noise, because that's your main job. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Joanna. Yeah, that's great. And I was just going to sort of summarize by, I think it was you, Joanna, that was saying, you know, you need to do something in order to adapt. So I think that's the big takeaway. You know, think about, you know, doing something to penetrate the UK market, putting your best foot forward, and then there's plenty of support, as Andy has said, both in Queensland and also over here, to help you to adapt and to succeed. So I think that's probably a good way to finish. I'd really like to thank both Andy and Joanna for your input and your time today, but also in preparing. It's been really, really helpful. And just remind everyone that's watching that this will be recorded, as I said, so you can obviously review this back at your own leisure, alongside the 3 other sessions that we've run to date on different subjects, and there will be more coming up. So please do keep a lookout for those. We'll obviously be promoting them in the same way. I should also actually thank my dog, Bilbo, for his contribution, because that was quite impressive at the start. He's gone a bit quiet, thank God. But yeah, so on that note, I think I'd like to wrap up and thank you all as well for attending, and look forward to staying in touch. Thank you.